I will now perform practice 6. Practice 6 overview. This practice covers the following topics: using different techniques to extract execution plans, using SQL monitoring. Moving to the activity guide, this is our overview for practice 6. Practice 6, generating and displaying execution plans, is our title. Okay, practices for lesson 6 overview. Practices overview. In this practice, you will use SQL Developer to create and view execution plans, and use SQL Plus to create and review execution plans from various sources. The whole goal is to be able to access the execution plans. In other chapters, we talked about the detailed analysis, so we're focusing on the mechanism to receive them. Practice 6-1, extracting an SQL plan by using SQL Developer. Overview. In this practice, you use SQL Developer to display the execution plans for an SQL query, and then use the auto trace option. We have a group of tasks. Task 1. The script files for this practices are in this home directory. We need to set the SQL worksheet preferences to set the default directory. Then we give us the steps. We go under the Tools, Preferences, under the Database item, and select it, and we need to set this as our home. If we scroll down a little further, we get a screenshot, but I'm just going to capture this now because I'm going to use it when I actually do the practice. Just did a Control-C. So they show us under the Preferences tab with it open, moving it. We've done this a couple of times now. So we're going to move to SQL Developer and do this part of the practice. Okay, we want to go to the Tools, to the Preferences. And under the Preferences, I've already had it because the last practice I set it to this environment. I'm just going to replace that with the new one. Save it. We'll make this a little bigger. It makes it easier to work with. And then I'm just going to go to my computer, shrink it, refresh it to make sure it has the latest information. And now we go to the Explain pane. And in there we'll find a group of script files that we can use. We can load them and run them, or we can go in. And I'm just cleaning up the last piece from the last practice. So we'll follow on in the practice. There's generally, with these, two different ways. You can either load them by taking one of these and right-clicking on them and open them, and then picking it in, or you can just start an SQL Plus session and then paste them in if they give you a copy that you can paste in conveniently. So moving back, so now that we set the environment, okay, we've gone in and select the files and from them. So they should appear as this list, and we saw that. We expanded that, and we found the files under them. And now what we want to do is execute some of them. So we can either use the files they provided, the way they set it up, or in this case, because they were kind enough to put it in the box, we can display it. So what we want to do is task 2, display the explain plan using a query running from the Scott user. And this is the query we want you to do. You can either cut and paste this one for the session. So that's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to click on here, go down, open up a new worksheet. We want to use this for the Scott Tiger account. For some reason in this environment I hadn't got around to creating it, so we can do that quickly if I happen to not have it. This is realistic what happens sometimes in the practices. I can take an existing one like HR, right click on it, go to the properties, it will bring it up, and now I want to create the Scott Tiger connection. Scott. Okay, the username is Scott, and the password is TIGER. Test it as we did earlier on, just to make sure we have it. Save it. I can open it from here, but quite often what I choose to do is to open the worksheet and use the Scott connection. Okay, now I can go in and take the SQL statement the way they entered it in here, and I can place it in the paste buffer in my work area. I'm just going to paste it into the work area. Now we knew that we had a group of icons on here. We've already used the first one that does run the one statement. We can run a worksheet, run everything in here as a script if we had more than one statement. Then the third icon is the auto trace. They also will allow you to use the F6 key on the keyboard to trigger it. And the explain plan, you can also use F10, or you can click on the icon depending on how you feel. So we wanted you to click on it. Now, unfortunately, they're pointing to the right one, their little red box in the slide. Okay, so click on the plain plan button, and notice we get the plan. So very, very simple. Just go back to the worksheet. We got the statement in here, hit on that. Remember, explain plan doesn't execute it. It just shows you the plan. And sometimes I adjust the size so I can see the statement and make it easier to see the execution plan. This is joining two tables as an equal join from the stock Kiters employees and department stripped down version. This it decided to do is a sort merge. It has to sort both sides, or it can find an index, and an index full scan will provide one side sorted. So we're just having a look so we see the execution plan here. It also tells us the object each step is on, the options, whether we're doing a table access by row or a full scan of an index, or the bottom one is we're doing a full table scan on the employees table. It also shows me the cost. Remember, it doesn't execute it, doesn't collect any runtime decision information. So we wanted to observe it and note the plan was available. And then they showed you that the results they get that look very similar to mine. The second thing we want to do is change the query to the following one in the box. There is also employee not exist that you can use. And this time we wanted to do the plan table, the plan for this one. And once again, execute it. And they haven't told us any to change the connection, so we'll use the Scott Tiger. So once again, the infamous Scott account. So I can go in and change the size of this so I can paste it in a little bit easier, just to make sure I got the whole thing. And then we can execute the plan to get the plan on the new table. And once again, kind of convenient just to move it around a bit. This time, we were doing an equal join with a non-exist. So it can solve that as a hash join for the part of it. Okay, and a sort merge, and with a nested loop. So it picked an interesting way of doing it, and it shows us the option. This is merge is being done to do the anti-join portion, which is the not exist subquery at the end of it down here. Now, one of the things I have to be careful not to change it. I accidentally change them occasionally. And then we're doing the sort merge to do that calculation. And then we're doing a nested loops. And it shows you how we're accessing the table. Okay, but still no statistics. And we just wanted to show you a little more complex. You sometimes have to scroll through it to see the information you're looking for. So moving on to the next part, they showed you the execution plan that was like the one I showed. Now what we want to do is collapse the information about the filters. You can go in and shrink the information by hitting the minus sign to shrink it. So down at the bottom, we just wanted to show you could do that. Go down to the filters, which is fairly long, and we can just collapse it. By collapsing portions of it, quite often it makes it a little easier to read it. It's a little more compact. And if we're interested in them, we can always expand them again to see them, so we can shrink them, expand it, as we're looking at the execution plans. Okay. The next thing we want to do is use the sys connection to grant Scott Tiger some extra privileges. We want him to select catalog role and select any dictionary so he can look at some of the data dictionary roles. And then we want to do, and we're doing that in anticipation of running AutoTrace. We could have also gave him the AutoTrace role. It should have gave enough, but they chose to do it a little differently. So we already have a Scott connection, so what I want to do is create a new one. I'll just get rid of this one for now. We'll recreate it. I don't want to save any changes in it. I just like to keep my screen fairly clean. Go to the sys connections, and then we're just going to paste in the two commands that they want us to do. They put them nicely in this box, so it makes it easy. Anything on the screenshots from the tool is impossible to paste from, so it's just a convenience that they put them up. Put them in here, and now I'm going to execute them as a script file to get them all executed. So it did the two grants for me. I could have did them individually, but it's just a little more convenient to do them in one shot as we're doing these. So once we granted the privilege, now what we want to do is turn on the AutoTrace for this. So just cleaning things up, I'm going to get rid of that session. I've already got the privileges. Now I'm going to create a new session by Scott connection, and I'm going to paste in the same command. I could have kept the old one, but I'm always worried, make sure he has the privileges. So reconnect will guarantee he has it. So just scrolling back to find the select statement that we did above. It's up here a little bit, the one with the EP not exist. I believe that's the one we want. We'll put it in the paste buffer and scroll down. There's where we showed the original one, talked about collapse in it. And then we want the AutoTrace. So what we wanted to do is execute that query. I could have did the SQL. They stored it, but I'm just do it this way. Put it in the paste buffer. Once that I have it in the paste buffer, I can do the AutoTrace, which was the third one. If I hover over it, will show me. We can just confirm it. Click on the AutoTrace. It will collect the AutoTrace. It will give me the execution plan. I move it around a little bit. And I can shrink these smaller so I can see it. It's the same plan as before. We can do the same thing, shrink the filters just to make it a little more readable. But the other section they give us, so I made this a little bigger just so I could see it, is the statistics. And as I mentioned in the practice, they give you a lot more statistics than we saw when I did the demo of doing SQL Plus. And there's a fair number of them. A lot of them in this case are actually 0, but some of them aren't. So there was one back there that wasn't. One was the number of round trips to and from the client. We had DB links after that, but we didn't do it. Okay, so then we have the bytes received from the client. So the information we saw, plus some additional information that we didn't see in the SQL Plus session when we did AutoTrace from in there. So there are a fair bit more statistics now. In this case, a number of them aren't filled in. So they're not all that interesting. So we can actually shrink that if we don't want to see it. Once we reviewed it, it gives us a little more area for looking at the execution plan. The next portion of the package, they just actually show you the demonstration that they did for what theirs look like. And they showed you they had the statistics. The next portion, task 6, is we want to customize the explain plan by adding cardinality information to the explain plan. We're going to do that under the preferences, but now we're going to go for a different area. So let's just pull up our preferences first. Under tools, under preferences. Okay, we were looking at the worksheet. We're going to go back to the practice material, scroll down a little further. So what we want to do is click on the database and the auto. So I have the database area open on the left hand side, and what we want is the AutoTrace explain section. And there are different options. Some of them are selected automatically. They wanted us to add the cardinality to the explain plan. And I'll go back and check to see if they actually wanted to do the same thing for the AutoTrace. They decided not to do that. as part of this, so they didn't bother doing it. So let's go save that change. Okay, once we make the change, we can just press OK on it. And they showed us doing that down at the bottom of the screen. Okay, then we're going to go back and generate the explain plan for it again. So it was the fourth option, explain plan. Click on this. It now gives us the plan table, but now it's added the cardinality to it, which is the rightmost item. So they show us the estimated number of rows they came up with for each of the steps. That added a little bit of additional information. And you can control depending on what you're interested in. And also you can slide these down and make them bigger and smaller to make them easier. A lot of these costs aren't all that big. It makes some of the other things, sometimes we might choose to make the operations, if they get long and deeply indented, bigger, so you can actually tailor it for your needs as you're actually working with it. So we just wanted to demonstrate we could add the cardinality. Okay, and that completes the practice 6-1, where we're looking at now. We're coming up to practice 6-2, extracting the execution plans. Okay, in this practice, you will use methods to extract various methods to extract the execution plan by using the optimizer to execute a query. Note, all the scripts needed for this practice are found in the $labs/solutions/explain plan, and we're going to be doing these at the operating system level. So I'm just going to capture that directory because we're going to have to create, in this case, a couple of sessions. So we're going to create one that's going to start do the startup for the practice. Okay, and it creates a user EP and a table called test that we're going to use in this particular practice. So let's move to our practice environment. Shrink. We're already in it. We're just going to shrink the SQL+. We need to create 2 terminal sessions. I'll create the first one now. I'm going to make them a little easier to look at by making them larger. Okay, and the first thing we want to do is cd to that directory. And I'll have to put the cd command in front of it. The second thing I'm going to do is set up the Aura environment. I have a habit of forgetting, and once in a while I do it at the front. Hopefully I won't forget it for this session. Okay, and then what we want to do is execute this setup, and it shouldn't take too long to do it. Put it in the paste buffer, execute it. Okay, it takes a few moments for it to do it. While it's executing it, it's doing the setup. We're flushing the shared pool, doing this, creating some things, so it's continue to work on it. Okay, so from the same terminal session, and we're going to refer to this from now on as session 1. Okay, we're going to enter it. And one of the things we can do for convenience in these, we can go to the terminal and we can actually set a title on them. We can call this one, it has a default name, but we can call this session 1 just so I know where it is. And it just labels it, just makes it a little easier while I'm doing the practice to do it. And it actually completed the first step where we did some things. Now we want to issue a session. So 2 from the same terminal, as we mentioned, terminal 1 in the rest of this practice. Be ready to execute EPS script. Enter the command, do not execute it. So we want it in the buffer, but don't execute it. So I'm going to put a part of the command in so I can paste it. And then if it tries to execute it, it won't be able to. Sometimes it puts the cache. Put the H, but we're not going to execute it yet. We're just going to give it a moment. Now we're going to go down to step 3 from a second terminal session, referred to as session 2, so we're going to have to create this. So I'm just going to shrink this one to the desktop. For a moment, I can always find it as session 1. Create a new one, okay, make it a little bigger, because it gets a little hard to read. Okay, then we're going to cd to our directory. And before they do that, just to make sure I do it, I'm going to run the Aura env set Systune as our SID to get everything set up for the practice. CD to this particular directory that we're using, where we have all our fun scripts located. And at the same time, just before we get started, I'm going to put the title on this one, because we're going to call this one Session 2. So it just makes it a little easier for me to find them when I'm working on it. So I like taking things that help me, doing things that help me out when I do the practices. So connect as SQL Plus, okay, and then what we want to do is turn on monitoring. So we're going to use the second session. After you connect with SQL Plus Assist, for this session, be ready to use the SQL monitoring, okay, to monitor the statement we're going to run in session 1. You can execute the EP monitoring script for this purpose. Okay, so put the command in, do not execute it yet. So once again, where is the script file? I'm just going to put the part of it in just to make sure that I don't accidentally, it's not an end of the line, it shouldn't have a carriage return, but being paranoid, I want to make sure it doesn't get messed up. So now in session 2, I have it ready to go. Okay, so I have 2 of them just ready for the carriage routines. After you have readied both sessions, so this is task 4, press enter in session 1 to start the execution of the EP_session issue.shush file. That's the one we put in the first one. So we'll go back to session 1. We'll put him at the top, and this is the file we've got ready. Okay, now we want to start this. Do not wait and go right to, after it starts, go right to session 2 and press enter so we're starting to monitor it. So we want to get these so we catch it while as much as possible while it's monitoring. Hit enter, let it get started, go over here, hit enter. And why didn't we execute it? I forgot the @ statement for it. Hopefully it didn't slow us down enough. Okay, and it's setting up the execution. So you can see that session 1 uses a nested loop once we get the report. So this is looking at the report in session 2. Whoops, we took a look at it. Now this is one case I may actually want to make it zoom it back out a little bit and then just make the screen larger, wider, so I can actually see if we can get it not to wrap, but it wrapped a bit on us. So it's using a nested loop to execute this statement. If we scroll up, it will tell us whereabouts it is in it. So it's been running for it ran for 17 seconds. It's very hard to catch it when it's in it, and it said it was done. But by looking at the execution plan, it will actually show us the execution plan that it actually used for this statement. So it's a little tough to catch it because it's so short, okay, in our session, but it will show us the execution. If I got it formatted rightly, it should actually show it, so I guess I should just shrink it a little more and see if we can zoom out enough. It still wraps in this session, okay. At least we got to experience it. After 30 or 50 seconds, depending on the environment, you should see the following output on session 1. So if we look in session 1, it gave it to us. And actually, in my in-practice environment, it only took 17 seconds to get there. So it's actually pretty quick. It was a little quicker than theirs. Theirs took about 20 to 30 seconds in theirs. Okay. From session 1, we want to connect as the EP user and look at it. So this was session 1. I labeled this session 1. We want you to do this. Now we can stick it in the paste buffer, connect to session 1. Okay. And we want to look at different ways to execute. So now we want to do EP under SQL. And now it's just going to do an explain plan of a select statement using the test statement. And then we'll have a look at the execution plan by calling dbms_xplan. So a little idea of what we're doing. Going to shrink this down a little bit. make it wider. So, whoops, if I can catch the edge, I will, to make it a little easier to read, and actually shrink it down with a goal. Whoops, I didn't want to make it full screen, but that will work. I was actually trying to full screen it. I was actually just trying to zoom out a little bit to make it a little easier to read. I still want it to be readable, but I'd like to make it a little easier to read as we're doing it. And paste in the, we already have the connect string, so now we're going to paste in the command we want. I guess I didn't grab that. So we're going to execute this script file. Put it in the paste buffer, put @ and then the name of the file to execute it. Okay. And I swore I put it in the paste buffer, but I guess I didn't. Try it again. Real life experience doing practices. Paste it. So now I got the right one in the paste buffer. Now I just have to hit the @ and execute it. Okay, and this shows us for our select statement, which was the select count to star from test 1, test 2, where we're doing an equal join. It decided to use the hash join and using a index. It's using the same index on each copy of the table, okay, that we're joining. They happen to have the same indexes on them. And it gives us a number of anticipated rows, okay, the amount of number of bytes we're estimating, and a cost to execute the statement, and then, okay, overall. So it gives us the cost of doing the hash join, didn't document any costs, and it gave us the overall cost of the statement overall. So that matches what they actually found in theirs. We're just exploring different ways of getting the execution plan. So that completed task number 7. We're now going to do task number 8. Now you want to monitor the execution plan that uses a hash join to compare with the one in step 4. You want to make sure that you use the correct execution plan this time. So in your session 1, start auto trace. We're going to set auto trace on, and then we're going to execute EP_execute to execute our statement. Do not execute it because you will need to put the SQL monitoring on in session 2 again. So we're going to turn on auto trace on to see what it comes up with. Okay, within our session 1, so this is my session 1. Go down to the bottom of the screen, turn on auto trace, set it up to execute it, but don't do it right now. Then we're going to go to session 2, and in session 2 we're going to do the monitoring again. Okay, so hopefully, let's try making this a little wider. So we'll call our monitoring script, paste it in. Now we got both of them ready. Now what we want to do is do the same thing. Click on the first one and let it start, and then immediately go to the second one and execute it. Okay, so we put it in. Now if I don't paste this in, I could actually do it by just the slash to get it to execute, but this will actually work either, because that's what we want to do, is load it and then monitor it. Okay, so we wanted to have it set up in the first one, and then we're going to go to session 1, execute it, and I'm just going to move it around a bit so I can get to session 2 quickly, so sometimes that helps out. Execute it, go to session 2, execute this. Okay, give it a moment to get going. So it comes up with the execution plan, and this time if I scroll up, it's actually executing right now. It's long enough. And it's using a hash join in this case, okay, to do it on the execution in session 2. You can see it uses a hash join on the top 2 first index scans looking at various reports. You can clearly see the optimizer uses a hash join to drive the index in the memory first. The operation is quick, though you cannot see it. The run is already done the first time you look at it. Then the probe is performed on the index again. This takes more time, and notice that it takes more cost. Okay, so do it. So they went in, and the first pass we don't see, it's fast enough. Okay, and then we notice the one that's doing the index join. So then it will monitor this and refresh it. We can go back and recheck it again, and it's still executing. Okay, and it's being executed. Now it has completed it, and it took it 31 seconds. It was long enough that I was able to create it. So down in session 1, it should look like this, saying it completed the query. So we'll go back to session 1. It shows us this is the query it did, and this is the execution plan. So there were just 2 ways of looking at it. The long-running queries are convenient to monitor with the SQL monitoring tool. This can be convenient while I'm working if I happen to like to work with SQL. And as I noticed, not as much information as we had from the GUI SQL developer when we actually looked at it. Okay, so we want to go back to step 13, go back to session 1 and disable auto trace. This is that session, so we'll just paste in the command here. Then we'll move down to the next step. Okay, task 14. From session 1, you can ensure that you gather all the execution plans for the following query without changing any parameters. Implement your solution. So what we can do is go and execute the statement, and then we can go in and retrieve them out of memory. So we have a little query that will display the cursors for the ones that were actually just to save us time from actually doing it in terms of entering the actual query. So for session 1, we want to execute this query, okay, and it's called execute with all. Okay, make sure we grab all versions. So we're going to set this up in session 1. It's going to execute that, and then in session 1 we want to retrieve it. Okay, so we've turned off auto trace, paste it in, execute our queries. It's going to do a group of them. While they're executing, we can keep an eye on them. Okay, it takes a few minutes for it to execute. And then we're going to go and retrieve it. So what we want to run is at retrieve all. It will actually show us how it's going after the data. It's going after the SQL trace. And then we capture that and we use it as the input. So we'll just let the second run finish. And then we'll be able to go in and execute that. So that took 30 seconds again. Now we're going to execute this little script file. I put it in the paste buffer. I couldn't remember if I did. Okay, it's going out and grabbing the execution plans by looking at them. I've got to go find where we ran it. And this time we went and had a look at all the executions of them. So this is where I ran it the last time. We've actually done a number of runs for them. So we're calling this retrieve all plans. It's doing a little formatting. And then we're looking for what copies of this statements that looking at. We did an explain plan for this earlier on. So that statement will be in memory, and we did a number of runs of this one. Okay, we also did gather statistics on one of them also. So we found 6 queries that have something that we were looking at. Then we go in and grab the execution plan for one of them. That's the DKVM, which is this one up here, one of our runs for it. We're passing in its execution ID, get the typical output, and it will show us the execution plan using during that run. Then we're going to go over and get another one, okay, that has child cursor number 1, and it also used a hash join. And then we grab one of the other ones. This is the one we ran with the gather statistics. That now gives us, because it was run with the gather plan statistics, it now gives us additional information. We get the estimated information. We also get the actual run information for this particular run. And then it will allow us to compare our estimated rows over on the left with the actual number of rows to see if our estimates are reasonable. And it looks like they're quite reasonable in this case for our execution. Okay, and then it showed us the out plan, so we looked for some additional information, and that was the couple of runs of them we actually want to show. So we're just exploring additional ways of dumping out the execution plan so that their output matches mine. You can scroll through it fairly slowly, but I'd already done it, so I did the first part pretty fast. Now we're up to, so that completes this part of the practice. Now we are up to task number 16. From the session 1, try to retrieve your execution plans from the AWR. You can use the previous found SQL execution IDs, okay, to feed it, okay. Then you can actually query DBA_history view, and you can see how it's done. None of the queries are stored in the AWR. Note, it is possible that a snapshot was taken. If so, some of the queries may already store it. So we're just going to retrieve it from the ones we used above. See if we can find them. We're going to run that in session 1. And if we find none of them, if we find some, it meant a snapshot occurred while we were doing this practice. If none of them are found, a snapshot hasn't occurred, so we're going to have to force a snapshot to be run. So how can we ensure? We'll make sure a snapshot is run. So there is a little procedure called DBMS workload repository create snapshot that can be run to keep them, to collect them. And we just encapsulate that within a script file so it makes it a little easier to run it. Execute it. It takes a few moments to take the snapshot. And then we can go back and re-execute show error. Once the snapshot is completed, do this and see if our execution plans have been moved to the snapshot that we can look at. So query the AWR. Now we go in and find our execution plans are now in the AWR snapshot. So very nice for the ones that we wanted to see. So it just gives us another source. AWR snapshot is particularly helpful if the the query we wanted to monitor was part of a batch job that ran last night at 3 o'clock. What it means is we or the DBAs don't have to be in collecting it. Okay, so now what we want to do is exit out of session 1, exit out of session 2 that we had been using here. Okay, and we've completed the practice. Okay, because there's no activities on the next page.